My daughter sat across from me at the kitchen table and demanded 50% of the retirement fund I had spent 40 years scrubbing hospital floors to save. She called it generational fairness. I just smiled, stood up, and retrieved the black folder I had kept hidden for this exact moment. By the time I placed the cold leather on the table, she had already lost everything. She just did not know it yet. My name is Evelyn Mercer. I am 62 years old, and for 40 years, I worked as an intensive care unit nurse, pulling 12-hour shifts that often bled into 16, standing over bodies that were failing while my own legs throbbed in protest. I live in a modest 3-bedroom house in Brookfield Pines, Colorado, a place I bought with a down payment scraped together from overtime pay and skipped vacations. I thought I knew what trauma looked like. I thought I knew what it felt like to see a vital organ fail. I was wrong. Nothing in the emergency room prepared me for the precise, surgical way my own daughter would try to cut my heart out at my own kitchen table. It was a Sunday evening. The roast chicken carcass sat in the center of the table, picked clean. My daughter, Lena, sat across from me. She is 34 years old, with the same sharp chin I see in the mirror every morning, though hers was currently set with a determination I had not seen since she was a toddler demanding candy. Beside her sat Eric, her husband, who was aggressively studying the grain of my oak table. And at the end of the table sat Patrick, my ex-husband, swirling the last inch of red wine in his glass, refusing to meet my eyes. The conversation had started innocently enough, or so I thought. Lena had spent the first hour complaining about the cost of living, the price of gas, and how hard it was to even think about having children in this economy. I had nodded, sympathetic. I knew inflation was hard. I knew interest rates were high. I did not realize she was laying the foundation for a robbery. It is a different world now. Mom, Lena said, her voice dropping to that reasonable, soft register she used when she wanted something expensive. We are working so hard, Eric and I, but we are drowning. We are the generation that got left behind. I took a sip of water, waiting, and then we look at you. She continued, her eyes locking onto mine. You mentioned last Thanksgiving, after a few glasses of wine, that your retirement accounts were doing well. You said you hit the milestone, $900,000, right between the 401k and the insurance payout from Grandma. The room went dead silent. The refrigerator hummed in the corner. That is my retirement. Lena, I said, my voice steady. That is money for when I cannot walk, for medical bills, for a nursing home so I do not become a burden on you. Lena sighed, a dramatic, suffering sound. She exchanged a quick look with Eric, then turned back to me with a smile that did not reach her eyes. That is just it, Mom. You are hoarding it. You are one person. You live in a paid-off house. You do not need $900,000 to die comfortably. But Eric and I, we need a lifeline now. She paused, leaning forward, placing her manicured hands on the placemat. We have discussed it, and we think it is only fair that you transfer 50% of your retirement fund to us, now, while it can actually save our future. I felt the blood drain from my face. I looked at Patrick. He cleared his throat, but said nothing. He just drank his wine. He knew. They had planned this. 50%, I repeated, the number tasting like ash in my mouth. You want me to give you $450,000 just like that? It is not giving. Mom. Lena snapped, her tone sharpening. It is generational equity. You boomers sat on the easiest economy in history, and now you are sitting on piles of cash while we starve. It is immoral. Immoral? I asked, feeling a cold calm settle over me, the same calm I used to feel when a monitor flatlined. I paid off your student loans. Lena, $60,000. I gave you $30,000 for the down payment on your condo. Was that immoral? Lena rolled her eyes. That was your responsibility. You brought me into this world. You owed me a start. That is the bare minimum of parenting. But now you are asking me to struggle while you sit on a dragon's hoard. It is selfish. If you do not help us. I do not know if I can look at you the same way. There it was. The ultimatum. The emotional blackmail wrapped in socio-political buzzwords. I looked at Eric, who was shrinking into his chair. I looked at Patrick, the man who had left me with debt decades ago, now silently cheering on our daughter's greed. And finally, I looked at Lena. I saw the entitlement etched into her face, the absolute certainty that she deserved the sweat off my back. I did not scream. I did not cry. I slowly pushed my chair back and stood up. The wood scraped against the linoleum floor, a harsh sound in the quiet room. I need a moment, I said. I walked past them, into the small home office adjacent to the kitchen. My hands were not shaking. I felt remarkably clear-headed. I walked to the filing cabinet in the corner, the one I kept locked. I turned the small key and pulled open the second drawer. There, nestled between tax returns and instruction manuals, was a black folder. The edges were worn. I had prepared it years ago, hoping I would never have to use it. I pulled it out, feeling the weight of it in my hands. It contained more than just paper. It contained the end of their illusions. I slid the drawer shut. I held the folder against my chest for a second, taking a deep breath. Then, I turned around and walked back into the kitchen to face the firing squad, the black folder resting silently in my hand, ready to burn everything down. The black folder felt heavy in my hand, but not as heavy as the memories that suddenly flooded my mind, drowning out the hum of the refrigerator, looking at Lena's expectant face. I was no longer sitting in my clean, paid-off kitchen. I was 24 years old again, standing in a damp, rented apartment in the working-class district, smelling of bleach and exhaustion. I had just started at the New Caldera Medical Cooperative back then. I was a young mother with a husband who had big dreams and a resume that never quite matched them. To make rent and buy formula, I took the shifts no one else wanted. I worked 12 hours, sometimes 14 hours straight, running on vending machine coffee and sheer panic. My back ached constantly, a dull throb that settled into my spine before I was even 30. Yet, every single payday, before I bought groceries, before I paid the electric bill, I put a percentage into my 401k and my IRA. It was not financial savvy. It was terror. Patrick, sitting at the end of the table now with his wine, had been different then. He was full of promises. This startup is going to change everything. Evie, he used to say, his eyes bright with mania. I will retire us both by 40. You just wait. But the startups failed, one after another. The graphic design firm, the custom furniture business, the import-export scheme. Each failure meant I had to pick up another weekend shift, another holiday double time. I missed Christmas mornings. I missed school plays. I became a ghost in my own house so that we would not lose the roof over our heads. I remembered a specific night in the break room at New Caldera. It was 3 a.m. I was eating a cold, soggy turkey sandwich. holding the phone to my ear with my shoulder while I charted patient vitals. Lena was 5 years old and burning up with a fever at home with a babysitter because Patrick was out networking. "Mommy." My throat hurts. Her small voice had whimpered over the line. "I know. Baby. I know." I had whispered, tears stinging my eyes. "Take the purple medicine. Mommy will be home in 4 hours. Then the overhead speaker crackled. "Mercer. Room 302. Code blue. 5 minutes. "I have to go, baby," I said, choking on the words. I hung up on my sick child to go resuscitate a stranger. That was the price of this money Lena now wanted. For decades. I drove a sedan that rattled when it went over 50 miles per hour. I wore scrubs until they were threadbare. We never went to Disney World. We went to the local creek. I did this because I saw what happened to people who did not save. I once brought a teenage Lena to the hospital to pick me up. I took her past the waiting room, pointing out an elderly woman weeping at the admission desk because she had to choose between her heart medication and her rent. "Look at her. Lena," I had told her sternly, gripping her shoulder. "I swear I will not let you live like that. I am working this hard so I never have to burden you the way she is burdening her family." Lena had just shrugged, popping gum in her mouth. She did not understand then, and she clearly did not understand now. When she went to college, I drained my personal savings to keep her loans low. I worked 7 days a week for 4 years. When I handed her the check for her final semester, hoping for a thank you, she just tossed it into her bag. "You work all the time anyway, Mum." She had scoffed. "It is not like you have hobbies. What is the big deal?" The big deal came when I turned 55. I sat across from a financial advisor, a kind man with wire-rimmed glasses. He looked at my portfolio, the result of 30 years of compounded interest and skipped vacations. "Evelyn," he said, smiling, "if you keep this discipline up, in 10 years, you can retire safely. You will be okay. You will never have to depend on anyone." I walked out to the parking lot that evening, sat in my rusting car, and wept. I cried for the relief, and I cried for the lost years. I had bought my freedom with my life. I blinked, returning to the present. Lena was tapping her manicured fingernails on my granite countertop, a rhythm of impatience. "It is just money sitting there." "Mom," she said, her voice dripping with entitlement. "You made it at New Caldera." "Right, just answering phones and changing bedpans. It is not like you were a surgeon." She looked at the funds as a lottery win, a magical pile of gold that had appeared from nowhere. She did not see the sweat. She did not see the missed milestones. She did not hear the flatline monitors haunting my nightmares. All she saw was a number she felt entitled to subtract from. I looked down at the black folder under my hand. She wanted my past. Fine. But she was going to get it on my terms. The silence in the kitchen was no longer empty. It was heavy, filled with the scratching sound of Eric unzipping a leather portfolio he had placed on the table. The vague talk of inflation and struggle was over. Now came the pitch. "We are not just asking for cash to burn." "Mum," Lena said, her voice smoothing out into a practiced cadence, like she was presenting to investors rather than the woman who taught her how to use a spoon. "We want to open a wellness center, a yoga and holistic healing studio. It is about healing the trauma of our generation. We are all so stressed. We need a sanctuary." I stared at her, my daughter, who had quit 3 different corporate jobs because the managers were toxic, now wanted to heal the world with my retirement money. And if the studio fails, I asked quietly. Small businesses fail every day. Lena, if this goes under, my retirement is gone. I will be greeting customers at a grocery store until I drop dead. Lena let out a short, sharp laugh, shaking her head as if I were a child who did not understand how the world worked. God. Mom, you are so negative. That is your problem. You think the goal of life is just safety. To hug your money and die old and warm, she said, her eyes flashing with a mix of pity and disdain. We have to take risks. We have to live. We cannot just exist like you did. Before I could respond to the insult that she called my existence, Eric slid a bound document across the table. It was thick, glossy, and printed in colour. It is all here. Evelyn, Eric said, tapping the cover. We have projected a return on investment of 15% by year 3. We are asking for a seed capital injection of $450,000. In 10 years, we could potentially start paying you back a dividend. Think of it as partnering with us. I looked at the document, the sanctuary a haven for modern souls. They had printed this. They had bound it. While I was cooking this roast chicken, worrying if the skin was crispy enough for them, they had this document sitting in their bag, waiting to partition my life's savings. Patrick, who had been swirling his wine, finally spoke up. His voice was thick, sliding into that manipulative tone I had divorced 20 years ago. Evie, come on, he said, leaning forward, his elbows on the table. You always told Lena, ever since she was a little girl. Everything I do is for you. You remember you said, what is mine is yours? You made a promise. Do not turn into a liar now, just because the check is big. I felt a physical blow to my chest. I had said those words. I had said them when I was working double shifts and missing her school plays. I meant them as a vow of protection, not a blank check to be cashed while I was still breathing. I meant I was building a safety net, I said, my voice trembling slightly. I did not mean I would hand over the scissors so you could cut the net out from under me. Lena slammed her hand down on the table, making the silverware jump. See, this is exactly what I mean, she cried out, her face flushing red. Jason's parents just bought him a 4-bedroom house in the city. Sarah's dad paid off her entire credit card debt last month. Why do you have to be so difficult? You are one person. Mom, one. You live in this house alone. We are a family. We have a future to build. It is so selfish. Selfish? The word hung in the air. I paid for your wedding. Lena, I said, my voice low. $40,000. I paid off your credit cards 3 times. I bought you your first car. Does none of that count? Lena waved her hand dismissively, as if swatting away a fly. That is standard parenting. Mum, you do not get a medal for doing what you are supposed to do. But this is about you choosing your bank account over your daughter's happiness. She leaned in closer, her eyes narrowing, her voice dropping to a whisper that was far more terrifying than her shouting. I need you to listen to me, she said. If you say no to this, if you choose to hoard that money instead of helping us start our lives, I will feel like you do not love me. I will feel like you chose paper over flesh and blood. And honestly, I do not know if I can forgive that. I do not know if I can bring my future children to see a grandmother who cared more about her 401k than their well-being. The room spun slightly. It was a hostage situation. She was holding our relationship, my future grandchildren, and my own heart against my head, demanding a ransom of $450,000. I looked around my kitchen. I saw the height chart carved into the doorframe, marking Lena's growth from a toddler to a teenager. I saw the fridge magnets she had made in kindergarten. I realized, with a clarity that was colder than ice, that she was using the love those objects represented as a weapon. She thought I was weak. She thought my love made me stupid. In the silence that followed her threat, my mind drifted to the black folder hidden in the cabinet just 10 feet away. I remembered the day I sat in the mahogany office of Fiona Walsh, my lawyer, weeping over a smaller betrayal years ago. Evelyn. Fiona had told me, her voice stern but kind. You need to prepare for the day when she stops asking and starts taking. You need to build a wall that your heart cannot climb over. Prepare everything before she thinks she has a right to speak about your money. I looked at Lena, then at Eric's calculated business plan, then at Patrick's weak, expectant face. They were waiting for me to fold. They were waiting for the guilt to work. I took a deep breath. You are right, Lena, I said softly. I have been thinking about this all wrong. The house was silent, but it was not a peaceful silence. It was the heavy, suffocating quiet of a battlefield after the cannons have stopped firing. I could not sleep. I paced the hallway in my nightgown, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock in the foyer. Tick, tock, tick, tock. It sounded less like the passing of time and more like the erosion of my life, second by second, dollar by dollar. I eventually drifted into my small home office, the room adjacent to the kitchen. This was my sanctuary. On the wall hung a framed certificate, Excellence in Patient Care, awarded to me 15 years ago. Next to it were photographs of colleagues who had passed away, nurses I had laughed with in the break room and cried with after losing patients. Taped to the side of my monitor was a photocopy of my very first pay stub from the New Caldera Medical Cooperative. The numbers on that slip were small, pathetic even. But I remembered how proud I had been to hold it. Every cent represented an hour I had stood on my feet so my family could sit. I reached up to the shelf above my desk and pulled down a battered metal lockbox. Inside were the standard papers of a life nearing its end, life insurance policies, deed to the house, and bank statements. But at the very bottom lay the black folder. The leather cover was cool to the touch. I had always called this folder my nuclear option, the script for the day I could no longer bear the weight of being used. My mind drifted back to a rainy Tuesday 4 years ago. Lena had screamed at me in this very room because I refused to co-sign a loan for a luxury SUV she insisted she needed for her image as a realtor, a career that lasted exactly 6 months. You do not believe in me, she had shouted, slamming the door so hard the pictures rattled. That afternoon, I had driven to the office of Fiona Walsh, an estate attorney with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue. I sat in her leather chair, shaking, asking if I was a bad mother for saying no. Fiona had leaned across her mahogany desk, her voice softening but her words hitting like iron. Evelyn, listen to me carefully. Do not confuse love with being an ATM. If your daughter respects you, she will respect your financial boundaries. If she does not, well, then you are not raising a child, you are financing a hostage taker. That day, I had only signed a basic will, but as the months turned into years, and the requests turned into demands, and the demands turned into expectations, I had gone back to Fiona, We drafted the documents inside the black folder. We built a fortress. I sat at my desk and opened the folder. The first document was a revised last will and testament. The second was the charter for the Mercer Resilience Fund. I read the legal language, running my finger over the stiff paper. The entirety of the estate shall be liquidated and transferred to the Mercer Resilience Fund, a charitable trust dedicated to providing scholarships for single mothers returning to nursing school and emergency financial aid for retired healthcare workers. Every line I read felt like a surgical incision, cutting away the necrotic tissue of my guilt. For decades, I had assumed Lena would inherit everything. I thought that was the natural order. I sacrificed. She received. But tonight, staring at the numbers $900,000, I realized that leaving this money to Lena and Eric would not be a gift. It would be an enablement. It would be the final act of destroying her ability to stand on her own 2 feet. I read the contingency clause Fiona had added, the one that protected me while I was still alive. It stated that any proven attempt to coerce, intimidate, or legally force the grantor into releasing funds would result in the immediate activation of the bad actor protocol, effectively disinheriting the aggressor entirely from any residual family trusts. I sat there for 2 hours, reading and rereading. The clock chimed 3 a.m. My heart, which had been racing with anxiety during dinner, slowed to a steady, cold rhythm. Lena wanted a business deal. She had brought a printed proposal and a breakdown of return on investment to her mother's dinner table. She wanted to treat our relationship like a transaction. Fine, I whispered to the empty room. If you want a transaction, Lena, I will give you one. I closed the black folder. The decision was made. I was done being the mother who gave until she bled. Tomorrow, I would be the woman who finally sent the bill. The next morning, the sun rose with a deceptive brightness, casting long, sharp shadows across my living room. I did not make coffee. I did not turn on the news. At 8 o'clock sharp, I dialed the number for Fiona Walsh. Evelyn Fiona answered on the second ring, her voice thick with sleep but instantly alert. It is early. Is everything all right? I need to see you, I said, my voice steady, lacking the tremor that had been there the night before. I need to execute the protocols we discussed, the nuclear option. There was a brief pause on the line. I have an opening at 9:30, Fiona said. I will have the coffee ready. I arrived at her office 20 minutes early. Fiona's office was a fortress of mahogany and leather, smelling of old paper and expensive decisions. When I sat down across from her, I did not cry. I did not wring my hands. I simply recounted the events of the previous night, with the clinical detachment of a nurse giving a shift report. I told her about the demand for $450,000. I told her about the threats regarding my future grandchildren. I told her about the printed business plan. Fiona listened, her face hardening into a mask of professional fury. She took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. Legally, Evelyn, you know where you stand, she said, looking me in the eye. That money is yours. Every cent of the $900,000 in your retirement accounts, the equity in your home. It is all solely in your name. They cannot touch a dime unless you sign it over. They have no case. I know they have no case, I said, opening my purse and pulling out the black folder. But they think they have a moral claim. They think I am a storage unit for their future wealth. I want to correct that misunderstanding. Permanently. I pushed the folder toward her. I want to activate the Mercer Resilience Fund, I said. I want to transfer 80% of my liquid assets into the charitable trust we drafted. I want the money to go to scholarships for older nurses, single mothers going back to school, and emergency funds for patients who cannot afford medication. I want it irrevocable. Fiona nodded slowly, taking notes on her legal pad. And the remaining 20%, she asked. Put it into a separate trust, I instructed. The Lena Mercer Life Reset Trust. But I want the conditions locked down tight. She only gets distributions if she maintains full-time employment for 6 consecutive months in a job that I do not subsidize. She must attend weekly financial counseling. She must submit to random drug tests if necessary. And most importantly, she must issue a written apology for the emotional blackmail she attempted last night. Fiona stopped writing and looked up, her expression concerned. Evelyn, she said softly, if we do this, if we lock the money away like this, Lena will go crazy. She will feel like you are punishing her. She will say you are vindictive. This is not punishment, I replied, my voice cold. This is the tuition for a course she should have taken 10 years ago. It is called reality. I have paid for her degree, her wedding, her car, and her condo down payment. I am done paying for her entitlement. I reached into my bag again and pulled out a second document, a thick stack of papers held together by a binder clip. I also need you to certify this, I said, placing it on the desk. This is the ledger. I spent all night compiling it. It is a line-by-line accounting of every dollar I have spent on Lena since she turned 18. The $40,000 for the wedding, the $60,000 for student loans, the $3,000 for the bail money that one time in college. It totals nearly $200,000. I want this presented as an investment report. Fiona took the stack, flipping through the pages, her eyebrows rising. You want to present this to her. I want you to draft a formal proposal, I said. Make it look like a business contract. Wrap it in the black folder. I am going to call a family meeting. I told them I would give them an answer. This will be my answer. For the next hour. We worked. The sound of Fiona's pen scratching against the paper and the clicking of her keyboard were the only sounds in the room. It felt like we were planning a heist. But instead of stealing money, we were stealing back my dignity. When the transfer documents were ready, Fiona slid them across the polished wood of the desk. Once you sign these, the assets move, she warned. The house goes into the trust. The retirement accounts transfer. You will be the trustee, but the beneficiary is no longer your daughter. It is the charity. There is no going back. I picked up the heavy fountain pen. I thought about the way Lena had looked at me last night, like I was an obstacle to be removed. I thought about the 12-hour shifts. I thought about the missed Christmases. I am not going back, I said. I signed my name. The ink flowed dark and permanent. Evelyn Mercer. As I laid the pen down, a wave of relief washed over me, so powerful it almost made me dizzy. It was the same feeling I had the day I walked out of the hospital for the last time, retiring from nursing. But this was better. I was not just retiring from a job. I was retiring from the role of the eternal victim. I was retiring from being a wallet with a heartbeat. It is done, I said, standing up and smoothing my skirt. Now, let us prepare the presentation. The week following my visit to Fiona's office was not peaceful. It was a digital siege. My phone, usually a quiet device reserved for weather updates and photos of my garden, became a vibrating source of constant harassment. It started with the links. Lena sent me article after article with titles like The Moral Obligation of Generational Wealth Transfer and Why Boomers Are Responsible for the Millennial Poverty Crisis. Then came the videos. She flooded my inbox with short TikTok clips featuring young, tearful influencers talking about financial trauma and how parents who do not fund their adult children's lifestyles are essentially abusive. When I did not reply, the tone shifted from educational to aggressive. My phone lit up on Tuesday evening with a barrage of texts. "Are you ignoring me, Mom? This is serious. You are literally stealing my future by holding on to that money." A minute later, another one popped up. "You are being so selfish. It is actually scary." "I do not recognize you." I did not type back. Instead, I took a screenshot. I saved the image, printed it out, and added it to the pile destined for the black folder. Every insult was just another page of evidence. By Wednesday, the battleground had expanded to the Mercer Family Connect group chat, a digital space previously used for sharing Thanksgiving recipes and birthday wishes. Patrick, my ex-husband, decided to weigh in. "Evie, look," he wrote, his typing indicators flashing for an eternity before the message appeared. "I know you worked hard, but maybe you should compromise. Just give them a little to get started. I would help. You know I would. But things are tight right now. Be the bigger person." I read the message while drinking my morning tea. The audacity of a man who had not paid a dime of child support in 6 years, telling me to be the bigger person, was almost impressive. I did not respond to him either. I just captured the screen. Thursday brought a different kind of attack. Eric sent an email. The subject line read, "Financial Viability Analysis. RE Investment Opportunity." It was a long, rambling missive filled with charts and graphs. He had broken down my estimated living expenses versus my assets, essentially auditing my life without my permission. He argued that I could live on Social Security alone if I downsized aggressively, leaving the bulk of my savings available for their wellness studio. The final paragraph was chilled with a veiled threat. "We hope we can resolve this as a family." Evelyn, however, "We are currently exploring what legal options exist regarding the mismanagement of family promises and verbal contracts you made to Lena over the years." Mismanagement of promises? I whispered to myself, reading the line again. I printed the email. It went straight into the folder. By Friday, the silence in my house was contrasted by the noise Lena was making outside of it. She took her grievances to social media. She did not name me directly, but her posts were precise missiles designed to inflict maximum collateral damage. It hurts so much when the people who are supposed to support you turn their backs. She posted on Facebook, followed by a crying emoji. Imagine having the power to change your child's life with a snap of your fingers, and choosing to buy expensive, unnecessary things instead. Heartbroken. My phone rang that afternoon. It was my nephew, Mark, a sweet boy who lived 3 states away. "Aunt Evie," he said, his voice hesitant. I saw Lena's posts. Is everything okay? She sounds really upset. You know, family is everything. Right?" I gripped the phone tightly. "Mark," I said, keeping my voice level. "Family is about love and respect. Family is not an excuse to put your hand in my pocket because you do not want to work. Do not let her drag you into this." I hung up before he could argue. The breaking point came on Saturday morning. Lena sent a text that was different from the others. It was cold, formal, and clearly drafted by someone else. "Mom, since you refuse to discuss this like an adult, We need a formal mediation. We have retained a lawyer to facilitate a conversation about the equitable distribution of family assets. We want to meet. Next weekend. I stared at the screen. They wanted a lawyer. They wanted a corporate negotiation. They wanted to sue their mother for the money she earned cleaning vomit and blood off hospital floors. I typed my first response of the week. Fine. Then I sent a second message, but not at a law office. If you want to discuss my money, you will do it at my table. Bring your lawyer. Come to the house next Saturday at 2:00. I wanted them here. I wanted this final battle to happen in the very kitchen where I had fed Lena her breakfast before school, where I had helped her with her homework, and where she had sat just last week and demanded half of my life. I wanted the ghosts of our past to be the jury. I walked to the cabinet and unlocked it. I pulled out the black folder, now thicker with the week's fresh evidence. I placed it on the desk. Bring your lawyer. Lena, I said to the empty room. I am ready. The doorbell rang at exactly 2:00 on Saturday afternoon, a sharp, intrusive sound that signaled the beginning of the end. I was ready. I had spent the morning arranging the living room not as a space for family, but as a theatre of war. I placed the heavy oak dining table in the centre of the room, removing the vase of fresh flowers and replacing it with a single, empty glass coaster for each seat. On the wall behind my chair hung a framed photograph of Lena at age 4, her face smeared with chocolate ice cream, her hands reaching out to me. It was a calculated choice. I wanted them to look at the innocence they were destroying. Patrick, Lena, and Eric entered first, followed by a young man in a suit that was too tight and shoes that were too shiny. This was the lawyer. He introduced himself as Mr. Sterling, offering me a handshake that felt limp and dismissive. He looked around my modest living room with a veiled sneer, clearly categorizing me as a confused elderly woman who just needed to be managed. Please, sit, I said, gesturing to the chairs I had positioned on the opposite side of the table. They sat. The formation was aggressive 4 against 1. The cabinet containing the black folder stood just to my right, within arm's reach, silent and waiting. Mr. Sterling cleared his throat, opening a leather notebook. Mrs. Mercer. He began, his voice smooth and laced with corporate buzzwords. We are here today to discuss a path forward. We believe in generational empathy. We want to find a win-win solution where your needs are met, but where Lena's future is also secured. It is about balancing resources to maximize family wellness. I stared at him, my face impassive. Go on, I said. Lena took this as her cue. She leaned forward. Her eyes were red-rimmed, likely a cosmetic choice to enhance the victim narrative. Mom, this isn't about greed, she said, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. It is about the fact that you are sitting on a mountain of security while I am drowning. I feel abandoned. You raised me to believe I could do anything, but you kept the means to do it for yourself. How can you claim to love me when you watch me struggle and do nothing? Patrick chimed in, nodding solemnly. Evie, remember what you said when she was born. You said, everything I build is for her. You made a verbal contract with the universe and with us. You cannot just change the terms now because you got scared of getting old. I listened to every word. I let the silence stretch after Patrick finished, watching Mr. Sterling nod in agreement with this twisted logic. Then, I reached under the table and pulled out a thick, bound document. It was not the black folder yet. It was the ledger Fiona and I had finalized. I dropped it onto the wood with a heavy thud. "You talk about contracts," I said, my voice cutting through the room like a scalpel. "You talk about what I owe. Let us look at the data." I opened the ledger to the first page. 1998. Orthodontics. $5,400. I worked an extra 16 shifts at the clinic to pay for that cash because our insurance did not cover cosmetic alignment. I flipped the page. 2010. Semester abroad in Italy. $12,000. You said it was essential for your cultural growth. I cashed out a bond I had been saving for 10 years. Mr. Sterling raised a hand, his smile faltering. "Mrs. Mercer, with all due respect, I do not think rehashing parental duties is productive here. We are talking about liquid assets available now." I turned my gaze on him, cold and hard. "Do you have a spreadsheet of your client's financial history dating back 30 years, I asked. "If not, then I suggest you sit down and listen. I am not finished." He blinked, stunned by my tone, and slowly lowered his hand. I looked back at Lena. 2015. The wedding. $42,000. You wanted the venue by the lake. I refinanced the car to make the deposit. Lena scoffed, crossing her arms. "Oh my God, Mum. That is what parents do." "You are literally itemizing my childhood. That is sick. You are supposed to provide for me. That is your job. My job was to keep you alive and educate you." I replied. My job was not to fund a lifestyle I could not afford. Every dollar in this book, Lena, is not just money. It is my time. It is my cartilage. It is the sleep I did not get. The total here is $212,000. That is what I have already transferred to you. The room went quiet. The number hung in the air. Eric looked down at his shoes. Patrick shifted uncomfortably. Lena stared at the ledger, her defiance wavering for a split second as she saw the sheer volume of the pages. "You say I have abandoned you," I said, closing the ledger, "but the math says I have been carrying you for 34 years. It does not matter," Lena stammered, her voice rising in panic. "That is the past. We need the money now. If you do not give it to us, you are cutting me off." I stood up slowly. The chair scraped against the floor. I turned to the cabinet on my right and opened the drawer. The atmosphere in the room shifted. "Mr. Sterling straightened his tie. Patrick stopped swirling his water glass. I reached in and pulled out the black folder. It was thick, worn, and final. I placed it gently on the table, right on top of the ledger. "You want your inheritance?" Lena, I asked, resting my hand on the leather cover. "You want to know what I have decided to do with the money I broke my back to save?" I looked at each of them, the lawyer, the ex-husband, the son-in-law, and finally, my daughter. "This," I said, tapping the folder, "is the only thing I am going to give you today." I placed my hand on the cover of the black folder and flipped it open. The sound of the stiff leather bending was the only noise in the room. I slid the first document across the table toward Mr. Sterling. "This," I said, my voice steady, "is the deed to the Mercer Resilience Fund. It is an irrevocable charitable trust I established officially last week. The beneficiaries are not my family members. They are retired nurses living below the poverty line, single mothers struggling to finish medical school, and emergency funds for patients who are uninsured. Mr. Sterling picked up the document, his eyes scanning the legal jargon rapidly. His face paled. Lena stared at the paper, then at me, her mouth falling open. What she whispered, the colour draining from her cheeks. Then her voice rose to a shriek. You gave it away. You gave $900,000 to strangers. Not strangers, I corrected her, locking eyes with her. To women like me. Women who spent decades standing on concrete floors, missing their children's birthdays, holding the hands of dying strangers, only to come home and be treated like an ATM by the people they sacrificed everything for. But that is insane, Lena screamed, slamming her hand on the table. That is my inheritance. That is my money. It was never your money, I said coldly. It was my life. And I have chosen to invest my life where it will be appreciated. I turned the page in the folder. Furthermore, I continued, pointing to the next clause. My house, this house, has been transferred into the trust as a physical asset. You cannot sue to force a sale. You cannot claim a percentage of the equity. If I die tomorrow, the locks will be changed by the trustee, and the property will be sold to fund scholarships. You will not get a single brick. Mr. Sterling slowly closed the folder he had been holding. He looked at Eric and shook his head slightly. The message was clear. It is ironclad. We cannot touch it. Patrick, who had been sitting in stunned silence, finally spoke. His voice was trembling. Evie, surely you didn't leave Lena with nothing. She is your flesh and blood. You can't just cut her out like a tumor. I looked at Patrick, remembering all the times he had promised to take care of us and failed. I did not cut her out. I said, I gave her exactly what she needs, not what she wants. I flipped to the third section of the folder. This, I said, sliding a thinner document forward, is the Lena Mercer Life Reset Trust. Lena grabbed it, her hands shaking so hard the paper rattled. What is this? She snapped. It is a conditional trust, I explained calmly. There is a sum of money set aside, $50,000. But it is not a handout. It is a paycheck. I leaned forward, clasping my hands on the table. The trust will only release funds in small, monthly increments, and only if specific conditions are met. First, you must maintain full-time employment for 5 consecutive years, and no. Lena, running a blog or a yoga studio that makes no profit does not count. Real employment, documented income. Eric made a noise in his throat, a sound of disgust. Second, I continued, ignoring him. You must attend a minimum of 40 sessions of cognitive behavioral therapy with a licensed professional to address your entitlement issues. And third, you must complete a certified financial literacy course and pass the final exam. This is disgusting, Eric spat out, his face flushing red. This is toxic control. You are treating a 34-year-old woman like a delinquent child. You cannot legally enforce this. I looked at Mr. Sterling. Counselor, I asked. Is it legal, Mr. Sterling sighed, adjusting his tie. He looked at Eric with pity. It is entirely legal. It is a conditional bequest. It is similar to a scholarship that requires a certain GPA. If the beneficiary does not meet the criteria, the trust simply does not pay out. Lena looked like she had been slapped. She was reading the fine print, her eyes darting back and forth. Suddenly, she gasped. What is this? She hissed, pointing to a paragraph at the bottom of the page. Clause 4b. Ah, I said, allowing a ghost of a smile to touch my lips. That is the reputation clause. It states that any public disparagement of the grantor, that is me on social media, in print, or in any public forum, will result in the immediate and permanent forfeiture of all remaining funds in the trust. I looked at her phone, which was sitting on the table. That means no more TikToks about your toxic mother. Lena, no more Facebook posts about financial trauma. One post, one tweet, one video, and the trust dissolves instantly. The money goes to the charity. Lena stared at me with pure hatred. She felt the trap snapping shut. She wanted the money, but to get it, she had to stop performing the role of the victim. "You are a monster," she whispered. "No," I said softly. "I am a mother who is finally teaching you how to walk. You asked for 50% of my future. I gave it to you. 50% went to people who are desperate for help. The other 50% is right there in that trust, waiting for you to earn it, waiting for you to value it more than your ego." The room was silent. The air was thick with the wreckage of their expectations. I reached for the last item in the folder. It was a thick, sealed envelope. I held it up but did not open it. "There is one last thing in here," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "I was debating whether to show you this, but since you just called me a monster, since you seem to believe that I have never given you a single flower in your life, I think you need to see it." The accusations hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. Lena's face was wet with tears, her mascara streaking down her cheeks in jagged black lines. She did not look like the confident woman who had demanded half my retirement a week ago. She looked like a child whose toy had been snatched away. "You are doing this to hurt me," she screamed, her voice cracking. "You are punishing me just because I dared to speak up about my needs. You are choosing strangers, people you do not even know, over your own flesh and blood. How can you sleep at night?" I watched her unravel, feeling a profound, heavy exhaustion settle into my bones. It was not anger anymore. It was just tiredness. I did not choose strangers. "Lena," I said, my voice quiet but filling the room. "I chose people who understand the value of $1 because they have had to bleed for it. I chose people who are grateful. You can become one of those people. The trust gives you that path. But that is your choice to make, not your right to demand." Patrick cleared his throat, looking like he wanted to jump in and save her, just as he always did when she was little. "Evie, come on," he started, his voice weak. "She is upset. You know how she gets. Maybe we can—" His voice trailed off. His eyes had drifted down to the open ledger on the table, specifically to page 12. I knew what was on that page. It was the co-signed loan for Lena's first car, a loan that I ended up paying off when she missed 4 payments. Next to the amount was Patrick's signature, pledging to help, a pledge he never honored. He stared at his own handwriting, the ink fading, but the failure still fresh. He closed his mouth, shrinking back into his chair. He finally realized that while he had been the fun dad, I had been the bank, the safety net, and the bad guy, all at once. I looked back at Lena. I could see the wheels turning in her head, the memories flashing by, colliding with the cold, hard numbers in the book. "Do you remember when you were 16? I asked softly. Lena sniffled, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "What you were 16. You were failing chemistry and math. You told me you felt stupid. You wanted to drop out of high school. I recounted. You were depressed. You stayed in your room for weeks. I pointed to an entry in the ledger. Summer of 2007. Vermont Arts Intensive Camp. $3,200. Lena blinked. I saw a flicker of recognition in her eyes. I emptied my emergency car repair fund to send you there. I continued. I drove around on bald tires for 6 months so you could go paint by a lake and feel special. Do you remember what you told me when you came home? Lena looked down at the table. She remembered. You threw your bag in the hall, I said, reciting the memory that had burned a hole in my heart years ago. And you said, it was okay, I guess. Kind of boring. The food sucked. You never said thank you, not once. You just complained about the cafeteria while I was praying my transmission would not fail on the way to work. The silence that followed was suffocating. Lena's face flushed a deep, shameful red. She was seeing the invisible flowers I had been planting at her feet her entire life, realizing she had trampled every single one of them without looking down. Mr. Sterling, the young lawyer, shifted in his seat. He was no longer looking at his watch or his notes. He was looking at me, then at Lena, with an expression of dawning horror. He was learning a lesson that no law school textbook could teach, the terrifying difference between a parent's duty and a parent's sacrifice, and how easily a child can twist the latter into the former. I leaned forward, locking eyes with my daughter. I had one more question. It was the question that had kept me awake for the last 3 nights. I want you to answer me honestly. Lena, I said, forget the money for a second. If I had a stroke tomorrow, if I could not walk, if I needed someone to change my sheets and spoon-feed me. I paused, letting the image sink in. Would you sell your car to pay for my care, I asked. Would you quit your job to sit by my bed for 12 hours a day? Or would you say, that is what insurance is for? Mom, would you say, I have my own life to live? The air in the room seemed to vanish. Lena opened her mouth to speak, to offer some reflexive defense, but the words died in her throat. She looked at Eric. She looked at Patrick. She could not lie. Not here. Not with the ledger between us. She looked down at her lap. Patrick turned his head to look out the window. Eric let out a long, shaky sigh. It was the first time in her life that Lena had to look in the mirror and see the truth. She was demanding a safety net she was unwilling to be for anyone else. She wanted the harvest, but she had never touched a plough. That is what I thought. I whispered. I reached for the final, sealed envelope in the black folder. It was time for the end. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the sound of my finger sliding under the flap of the final, sealed envelope. I pulled out the document inside. It was not a legal threat. It was not a bill. It was a contract, printed on thick, cream-colored paper. I laid it flat on the table, smoothing out the crease with my palm. Read the title. Lena, I said softly. Lena leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as she read the bold text at the top. Transfer agreement of 50% of Mercer Retirement Fund to Lena Mercer Klein. She read aloud, her voice trembling. She looked up at me, confusion warring with hope. Mum? What is this? Look at the date, I commanded. Her eyes dropped to the bottom of the page. October, 2023. But that was 2 years ago. Yes, I said, my voice thick with the memory of who I was, back then, a mother who still believed in the fairy tale. Fiona drafted this for me 2 years ago. I kept it in this folder. I was waiting. I pulled out a handwritten letter clipped to the back of the contract. I wrote this letter to go with it. I said, "It talks about how proud I was of you. It talks about how I wanted to give you a launch pad, not a crutch. I wanted to surprise you on your 35th birthday. I wanted to hand you this money and say, 'Here is your freedom, my love. Go build something beautiful.'" Tears began to spill from Lena's eyes again, but this time, they were not tears of frustration. They were tears of devastation. "I was ready to give you exactly what you demanded today," I said, looking her dead in the eye. "I just wanted you to be ready. I wanted you to be kind. I wanted you to be grateful without being paid to be grateful. But you could not wait. You had to demand. You had to threaten." Lena reached out a shaking hand toward the paper. "Mom." "I didn't know. I can change. We can sign it now, please." "No," I said, "we cannot." I picked up the contract. The paper felt heavy, like holding a dead dream. "You tried to take by force what would have been given with love," I said. "And in doing so, you proved exactly why you cannot handle it." I ripped the contract in half. The sound was loud, violent, like a bone snapping. Lena gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Patrick stood up, knocking his chair back, but he did not move toward me. He knew it was over. I ripped the halves again, and then again, until the future Lena had felt entitled to was nothing but a pile of confetti in my hands. I dropped the pieces into the small metal waste bin I had placed on the table for this exact purpose. I took a box of matches from my pocket. I struck one. The flame flared up, orange and hungry. "No, Mom. Don't," Lena cried out, lunging forward. "Sit down," I barked, a command that froze her in place. I dropped the match into the bin. The dry paper caught instantly. We watched in silence as the flames curled around the edges of the contract, turning the words "transfer" and 50% into black ash. The fire reflected in Lena's wide, horrified eyes. In seconds, $500,000 of potential money vanished into smoke. When the fire died down, leaving only a thin trail of grey smoke rising toward the ceiling, I pushed the black folder, now containing only the ledger of her debts and the strict rules of the trust, across the table toward her. "If you really want a part of my life," I said, my voice low and final, "start by reading every page of this. Start by seeing yourself clearly. There is no money in that folder anymore. Just the truth." Lena stood up slowly. She clutched the black folder to her chest as if it were a shield. Her face was pale, stripped of all the arrogance she had walked in with. She looked at Eric, then at Patrick, and finally at me. "So, is that it?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Do I still have a mother? Is there any chance for us?" I looked at the pile of ash in the metal bin. "Family is not a contract." "Lena," I said wearily, "it is a choice you make every day. The money is decided. It is gone. But the relationship that depends on whether you can love a mother who has nothing left to give you but herself." She nodded, a jerky, broken motion. She turned and walked to the door. Eric followed her, head down. Patrick lingered for a second, looking at me with a mixture of regret and respect, before he too turned away. The front door clicked shut. The lock engaged. I was alone. I sat in the quiet of my living room, watching the last wisp of smoke dissipate into the air. There was no grand reunion. There were no hugs. My daughter was gone. And I did not know when, or if, she would come back. But as I looked at the empty table and the picture of the smiling baby on the wall, I realized I could finally breathe. I had laid down the burden. The black folder was in her hands now. The rest was up to her. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please drop a comment below and share your thoughts on whether I did the right thing. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary, like the video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people.